Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Welcome to the course Environmental Impact Assessment. Today we'll cover coastal ecology and geomorphology under the larger ambit of our discussion, law, policy and institutional arrangement, which we are going on seeing right now. So accordingly, our coverage would include, we will look at the coastal ecology and geomorphology, and then we'll review the context and which are the authorities which are involved. Further, we'll look into the global agreements like the pattern which we are following, and then we'll look like what are its implications on coastal and marine biodiversity. Further, we'll look into the governance policy framework for coastal and marine environments, in particular to Indian context. Further, we'll look at the policies and guidelines involved. So the learning outcomes which will be we would expect would be that after completion of this particular session, you should be able to synthesize coastal ecology and geomorphology, context and authorities. You should be able to see like what's really happening, and then what's the complexity involved, and which agencies look into it, and how those regulations, acts comes in place. Further, you should be able to review the global agreements involved with coastal and marine biodiversity and look at its implications. Further, you should be able to look at the governance and policy framework for coastal and marine biodiversity and protected areas in the context of our country. Further, you should be able to identify policies and guidelines. So looking at the context and authorities involved, in the coastal ecology geomorphology context, we see that if you will recollect in our first week of lectures, we particularly lecture 3, where we reviewed status of global environment focused on oceans and coasts. We discussed the complexity involved in governance of the ocean. So we discussed about like how oceans currents can carry chemicals, waste, emerging organic pollutants and pathogens, and they can carry beyond areas under like whatever is national maritime boundaries. It can carry those beyond those boundaries, and so your area can be influenced by the activities of others or whom you have no control over. And marine organisms and seabirds may not remain under the jurisdiction of any state. So those kind of complexities are involved. Further, there are interlinkages between ocean conditions and marine life. So that's also interlinked. And there are like spatial dynamics of ocean process, what happens, like what we had seen in the diagram, that there are a lot of multiple activities and industries involved, and which have very far-reaching impacts. So many such patterns disrupt the livelihoods of the people who probably receive no benefits from the industry that has caused the impact. So those kind of complexities are there, and they become victims of functioning of the other people. So further we see, adding to that, there are multiple and often conflicting uses which we had seen here, if you recollect the graphics which we had discussed. So because of these complexities which we see here, there is no overall authority which is responsible for management of oceans and coastal resources. So you see, like, there are a lot of domains here, and then there's a lot of complexity here. Plus you see that there are multiple authorities which are involved. So responsibilities are shared among several central and local agencies with varying responsibilities and limits of jurisdiction, like what would be under whose control. So, for example, you can see here MOEFCC is responsible for management of resources in the coastal areas, coastal water, and it is the nodal ministry with major responsibility for protecting marine environment. It is also responsible for undertaking all legislative measures. So whatever legislations are prepared, MOEFC is the major authority here. And you also see that you have Department of Ocean Development, which looks into the scientific monitoring of the marine environment, management of resources in the high seas. You would also see Ministry of Agriculture, which is responsible for fisheries, aquaculture, fishing processing. And then you also find Ministry of Water Resource, which is responsible to monitor erosion. Furthermore, you see that you have involvement of Ministry of Defense in the Indian coast, like Indian Coast Guard, who are responsible for pollution, take pollution response measures, including oil pollution. So they are responsible for that. So you see the varied agencies which are involved. So you further see that Ministry of Surface Transport look at the ports and shipping, while Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas looks at the offshore installation, like what kind of installations would happen with infrastructure, then also the coastal refineries, pipelines and other infrastructure which would come up. Then you see involvement of Tourism Ministry for tourism related activities in the coastal region. Furthermore, you find Ministry of Mines for mining activities in the coastal region. So you see the level of complexity involved, and think of EIA procedure and the references you might have to take in the process for legislative understanding of any proposed project. So, looking at the global agreements related with coastal and marine biodiversity. So, you see that the Convention on Biological Diversity, which we have seen in another topic as well, we have, there are a lot of things which align with that. Then we have Convention on Conservation of Migratory Species of Wild Animals, since like marine would be dealing with that, coastal areas would be dealing with that. And we also see like this is also called as a Bonn Convention. Then you have Convention on International Trade in Endangered Species of Wild Fauna and Flora, like sites. So this also applies. And then you also see International Treaty on Plant Genetic Resources for Food and Agriculture. Then you see Ramsar Convention, or the Convention on Wetlands of International Importance. Then we also have World Heritage Convention. Then you also have UNFCCC. Then you have United Nations Convention to Combat Desertification, Hygo and Senegal Framework for Actions related with Disaster Risk Management. And then you also see United Nations Convention on Law of the Sea, which we had seen, agreement on straddling fish stock and highly migratory fish stocks. And then you also see London Convention, or Convention on Prevention of Marine Pollution by Dumping of Waste and Other Matters. You also see the Basel Convention. Then you also see FAO Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries, then also International Principles for Responsible Shrimp Farming, and International Convention for the Regulation of Whaling. And then you also see International Convention for the Prevention of Pollutions from Ships, MARPOL. So all these international agreements and legislations which you see are there for the coastal zones. So you may see here that much of the international legislation agreements provided here are both inland and coastal waters. So you see that how you might have to expand to the other inland areas as well. Many of the legislations are not specific to the coast but are highly relevant to the coastal zone. So therefore, many of them would apply to the coastal zone also when you are doing your EIA here. So, for example, we see that EU meets its obligation for like how do they really apply these or integrate these things. So, EU European Union meets its obligations for bird species under the Bonn Convention and more generally the Berne Convention by means of birds directives. So, they have a birds directives. Which is then translated into legislation of individual member states. So, individual member states. So, as per the convention, the birds directive is prepared, and on the basis of birds directive, all the member states prepare their own legislation. So, you see how it translates. Further, we see that similarly on this ground, similarly on this principle, you see ESPO convention. We have seen this before. ESPO Convention on Environmental Impact Assessment in Transboundary Context. So, when there are more than one nation involved, then in that context, this ESPO Convention comes into place. And that also sets obligations of the parties like to assess the environmental impact of certain activities at early stage of the planning process. So, that also is translated into local legislation. However, we are not part of this as a country. There are 30 signatories which are there, and then mostly it's EU countries and North American countries. So, as per the ESPO Convention, you see that EIA process is again aligned with it. For example, you can see the Directive 97 of environmental clearance. You see it brought EIA practice in line with the convention. So, this particular directive aligned their practice with the convention. And based on that, see how it is also influencing the process which is adopted. So, it increased the type of projects covered. So, we had seen very briefly like how we do screening. So, in that screening, what projects would come and what would not come. So, because of this particular convention, the types of projects covered would also increase or would be added to the list, and the number of projects requiring mandatory EIA. And here, if through this directive example, you can see that in the directive, projects like crude oil refinery, thermal power station, nuclear fuel, major installations, constructions, and so on are added to the list of activities which need to be considered under EIA. So, as per the convention, the list is refined and amended in the process. So, that's how it impacts any country's EIA process. So, because of these agreements, countries often set new screening arrangements also. So, including new screening criteria. So, they would also have new screening criteria and also establish minimum information requirements. So, here you can see in this like how they are going to look at the agriculture, silviculture and aquaculture, extraction industry. So, you can see it in the annexure 2. Likewise, you can see in annexure 3 what will be the selection criteria which will be imposed. So, characteristic of a project, which kind of projects would be included, locations of the projects, and so on. So, you also saw that how it was also implicating in our cases as per the list and special consideration for specific areas. So, therefore, amendments are made. So, based on these conventions, amendments are made in the EIA process also. In the context of UK, you will find amendments in the Town and Country Planning, EIA Regulation 2011. You would also see changes in Marine Works Regulation 2007, as well as Infrastructure Planning Regulation 2009. So, all are aligned with environmental impact assessment process. So, we see that there are many umbrella international directives, such as you also see at the international level. You can find Water Framework Directive, which is European countries need to follow. So, the requirements of Water Framework Directive need to be considered during all stages of planning and development process. So, this requires the EU member states to prevent, like this is really done to prevent deterioration and to protect and enhance the status of aquatic ecosystems. So, water framework directives are taken as a blanket directive, and based on that, all the member states have to take actions aligned with that. So, they need to ensure all the new schemes do not have any negative impact on the aquatic ecosystem. And I have also given you the link here to the directive. So, you can see all the general information given on the right hand side in the Water Framework Directive, like what is it about, what would be the decision making process and timetable, and then the links to that, and all the legislation involved, including groundwater and also surface water, chemical pollution. So, you would see that WFD requires all inland estuaries and coastal waters to reach good status by 2021, if not then by 2026. So, there's a timeline, there's a target which is aligned, and they approach good status by creating river basin district structure. In these river basin district they are required to align the environmental objectives. They have to set this to have those ecological targets in place. So, similarly, you see Directive 2008, that's the Waste Framework Directive, and that the purpose of this directive is to control pollution of all surface water, including coastal waters, and covers some port and harbor operation, and this is aligned with the EIA process. So, looking at Europe, you would also find that we have Marine Strategy Framework Directive, which aims to protect more effectively the marine environment across Europe by achieving good environmental status. So, it looks and they have certain time period and targets set. This is the first, it is said to be the first EU legislative instrument related to the protection of marine biodiversity, and it contains explicit like regulatory objective, very defined one, that biodiversity has to be maintained by a particular time period, and what kind of achievements they need to make in terms of environmental status. So, in the image you can see the steps to achieve or maintain good environmental status, the Marine Strategy Framework Directive Management Cycle. And here you can see in the blue circle, which represents the different elements that may be included in the marine strategies, and small orange circles represent the timeline to include the elements. So, by when, what, how they have to attain the target, and this helps to translate the global targets into national and local policies, and then to achieve that. So, aligned with the global agreement as well as national governance and resource management, we find following governance structure and policy framework for coastal and marine biodiversity and protected area, and specifically in our country we will be looking at. And aligned with it, you would see range of laws you need to refer or and abide by. In the image, you can see Coastal Regulation Zone Notification Forest Conservation Act. And aligned with it, you would see range of laws you need to refer and abide by. In the image, you can see Coastal Regulation Zone Notification. You can also see Forest Conservation Act, Water Prevention and Control of Pollution Act, Hazardous Waste Management Act, EIA notification, Environmental Protection Act, Wildlife Protection Act, and Biological Diversity Act. So you also see Deep Sea Fishing Policy, Indian Fisheries Act, and Marine Fishery Regulation Act under the Ministry of Agriculture. So you'll find Indian Ports Act, Major Port Trust Act, and Merchant Shipping Act under Defense, Coast Guard Act and Maritime Zone Act under Ministry of Shipping. So now looking at the Indian Coastal Regulation Zone, so we'll just briefly touch upon that. So protected areas are only one aspect of protection of coastal and marine ecosystem. So there are other ways of conserving coastal and marine biodiversity under the ecosystem approach, such as regulating the activities in coastal and marine ecosystems. So a lot of activities are controlled mere than just protecting it. So the main instrument regarding this is the, especially in the Indian context, is the CRZ notification under the Environmental Protection Act. So the other significant aspect is the restriction on fishing along the coastal areas. So you may refer to CRZ notification 2011 and 2018. Looking at the main purpose of this, why CRZ notification is created. So it is created to ensure livelihood security to the fishing communities and other local communities living in the coastal areas. So we did talk about our context and authority, like how one activity impacts the others' life and access to resources. So here you see that this particular CRZ notification ensures livelihood security. The other, it looks into conserve and protect coastal stretches, like how the protection could be done, and then promote development in sustainable manner. So whatever development happens, it happens in a sustainable manner based on scientific principles, taking into account the dangers of natural hazards in coastal areas and sea level rise due to the global warming. So we talked about all these things. So CRZ notification ensures that that's translated on the ground, and as a rule it comes and it's implemented. So in this CRZ you would see that there are general prohibition rules. So it prohibits certain kinds of activity. And especially prohibits the setting of new industries, expansion of the existing industries, and however, it's not an absolute prohibition. There can be some activities which are allowed in CRZ. These include like Department of Atomic Energy, power generation by non-conventional energy sources, and so on. So you can look into the details. And then there are certain things which are regulated for the environmental clearance purpose. Furthermore, you see that it's in this you are required to prepare a coastal zone management plan. So all these identified areas are supposed to, within this notification, they are supposed to prepare coastal zone management plan, where they would provide all the coastal related, what kind of development activities they are taking, and how they plan to protect the area and then improve the condition of this particular area. So this you see under the CRZ notification, and as per the notification you can see that they have identified CRZ 1, 2, 3 and 4. If you look at it, CRZ1 areas are environmentally most critical and are further classified as A and B. So you would see that CRZA would be the ecologically sensitive area, ESA, and the geomorphological features which would play a role in maintaining the integrity of the coast. So all those kind of areas would fall under CRZ1. A, and then you would see CRZ1B, which is like the intertidal zone, that is the area between low tide line and the high tide line. This would constitute the CRZ1B. Likewise, you can see CRZ2, which would be the developed land area up to the close to the shoreline, and within the existing municipal limits or in other existing legally designated, either it is a municipal limit or it is any other designation which is given there. So, that area would be included under CRZ2. Then you have CRZ3, that includes the land area that are relatively undisturbed, so that would come under CRZ2, CRZ3. Then you see CRZ3A, the subdivision, which are like densely populated areas where the population density is more than like 2000 plus per square kilometer as per 2011 census. So, that would be under CRZ-A, then area up to 50 meters from a high tide line on the landward side shall be usually it's marked as no development zone, which is like NDZ. So, they provide the coast and they are also required to provide the coastal zone management plan as per the notification, and it has to be undertaken with a due consultative process, and if any kind of development comes in these areas. Further, you see that there is CRZ3B, and you see that wherever you have population density less than 2,161 per square kilometer as specified, according to the census of 2011, shall be designated as CRZ-B. And there are buffer range which are given again, which would be considered as no development zone. So, likewise, you see CRZ4, then with that are also subdivided as A and B, and CRZ4 is the water area, and within that water area, the seabed area between low tide and up to like 12 nautical miles of seaward side is constitutes 4A. Likewise, you can see area water area and the bed area between low tide and the bank of the tidal influence water body is considered as 4B. So, that is for your understanding like how these areas are divided. So, that was about the CRZ Act. Now, moving on, we look at the Environmental Protection Act 1986 in the context of marine protection areas. So, EPA, the Environmental Protection Act 1986, which is an umbrella legislation for protection of the environment, that within that we identify these MPAs, and these provisions are made. So, within that everything is worked, and they are the ones who make the laws. Then you also see the Biological Diversity Act and 2002, and this also addresses the MPAs here. So, this act contains provision which aims at preservation of the biological diversity in India and establish a mechanism for equitable sharing of benefits arising out of use of traditional biological resources and knowledge. So, here you see through this how the sharing of the resources happen. So, that also you can see here as per the government notification. So, you also look at the Scheduled Tribes and Other Traditional Forest Dwellers Act 2006 in this context of MPAs. So, this one provides for a framework for recording forest rights, and it this act recognized rights under the act including responsibility and authority for sustainable use. So, they have the responsibility as well as conservation of biodiversity and maintenance of ecological balance, and thereby strengthening the conservation regime of forest while ensuring livelihood and food security for this. And this forest right include the community rights of use or entitlements of natural products such as fish, So that would be your concern while preparing the EIA. And then the rules under the Act make provision for inclusion of traditional fishing grounds as evidence for determination of forest rights. These could be of importance to fishing communities living in the for example, you can see Sundarbans Tiger Reserve area in West Bengal. So all those have been identified, and then they one while preparing should look into that. And then you also have wetlands conservation management rules of 2010. So you can look into the wetlands. What does the wetland mean? So wetland means an area of marsh, peatland and water. So all these are identified, and these are the areas where the water level remains near or above the surface of the ground for most of the year. And so there's a lot of significance which is given to its function and importance now. So there's a lot of protection which are being done. So regarding that, we have national wetland conservation programs which protect it. So the Government of India has been implementing the national wetland conservation program. It does it in the collaboration with the state government and state government and union territories. And under this program, there's been 100 plus wetlands have been identified till now by the ministry, which require like urgent conservation and management intervention. So you can see the entire map here. So moving forward, we see another act for a concern, which is like Indian Wildlife Protection Act of 1972. This also has implication on the marine protected areas. So looking at what is marine protected areas? They are the protected areas of seas and ocean that typically restrict human activities to protect natural or cultural resources. So as per the Wildlife Institute of India, Dehradun, you see the marine protected area is essentially a space in the ocean where human activities are more strictly regulated. So there's a very protected area. We cannot really do everything there are restrictions on what can be done in these areas. For example, you can see Pulicat Lake in Andhra Pradesh. Then you can also see Campbell Bay in Andaman and Nicobar Island. So which are all classified as marine protected areas. So you can see the activities permissible under various conservation levels for marine protected areas. You can see range of activities from research, traditional use, fishing, harbors, ports and permissions in national parks, sanctuary, community reserves, conservation. And most stringent you can see is the national park. So you will look into definitions of national park, sanctuary, community reserve in the later part of the lecture. So you see all range of activities which are allowed, activities like research, non-extractive, traditional use, non-extractive, recreational, shipping, traditional fishing, untreated waste discharge, fishing collection, harbor, mining, renewal. And you see like how across the national park, sanctuary, community reserve, conservation reserve, what all kind of activities are allowed and not allowed. So looking at all these protected areas, the largest MPAs are in India and Pacific Oceans. In 2014, more than 6,500 MPAs encompassed just over 2% of the world's ocean. So we have number of them here. And there are a number of voluntary marine nature reserves have been also established by agreement between non-governmental organization, stakeholders and user groups and coastal sites, and may have national designations and non-statutory designations also. So you might have these as well. Then we also see a special area of conservation, that is SAC. And you also see special protection areas or the Ramsar sites. So a lot of protection is provided to this as well, and they are at the international level. So Ramsar Convention, which is also the convention on wetlands for international importance, And especially for the wetland habitat. Within that, we identify a lot of areas, and presently there are 169 contracting parties to this. So, Ramsar's definitions of wetland considerably it's wide, so it includes lot of areas. So, like it includes areas of marine water, depth of which low tide does not exceed 6 meters, as well as fish ponds, rice paddies, and salt pans. So, in EU, we see many Ramsar sites are also SPAs classified under the Birds Directive. And however, despite all these kind of initiatives, it's still reported that there is significant development pressures on these areas. So, now looking at the Indian Wildlife Protection Act 1972. This came with the need to protect marine flora and fauna, and this specially recognized and reflected the purpose of protecting the wildlife. So, here you see this one particularly introduced the definition of protected areas and with inclusions of certain sections. And under this, if you look at the definition of protected areas, they also created national park. Here they created sanctuary, then the conservation reserve or the community reserve, that all were identified for the purpose of protection. So, if you look at their terms, how they are defined, so there are the sanctuaries are the areas of adequate ecological fauna and floral, geomorphological, natural or geological significance, and wherever such areas are found, they can be declared as sanctuaries for the purpose of protecting, also propagating or developing wildlife or its environment. So, sanctuaries can be declared, this can be declared by the state government or the central government. They both can declare any area which may fall under this category as sanctuaries. So, for example, you can see here Kaveri Wildlife Sanctuary. Here you can see this has been identified. Looking at national park, these are also protected areas. So, national parks are the areas of ecological fauna and floral geomorphological or geological association or importance. So, they are also identified within this, and then the within this, if it is identified for the purpose of protecting, propagating and developing wildlife and its environment. So, the state government and the central government, any of them can declare that as a national park. So, the example would include, so the example if you see here is, I have just picked up one, you have lists of these national parks. So, the Kaziranga National Park, Assam, you can see here from the country. So, looking at conservation reserves, so the paying attention to the concept of conservation reserve. So, conservation reserve is like and you also have community reserve. These concepts were introduced through the amendment of Wildlife Protection Act in 2003. So, both of these aimed at improving the socio-economic condition of people as well as conservation of the wildlife. So, looking at both the aspect, not only protecting the wildlife, but also taking care of the people. So, conservation reserves are areas which are owned by the state government and are adjacent to or linked to the protected areas. So, these are the surrounding areas. So, anything adjoining to the protected areas would fall under the conservation reserve or the community reserve area. So, the again the power of notifying this is with the state governments and they can notify this area. And the example of this includes Shokar, Ladakh, you can see here, which is as a conservation reserve site identified. And then you also see the efforts at international level to bring responsibility under one umbrella. So you saw that we have a lot of complexity in terms of there are a lot of numerous authorities, there are a lot of numerous acts as well as responsibilities, and then there are conflicting uses and requirements. But then there is effort being made to bring everything under international at the international level, there are efforts to bring all these things under one umbrella. So, for example, we can see it in UK. There's a Marine Management Organization (MMO), which was established under the Marine and Coastal Access Act 2009. So, this is an umbrella organization with overall responsibility. So, it looks after everything from licensing, regulating, and planning marine activities in these seas around the England and Wales. So they are overall in charge of this. So you can see here. So now moving at the policies and guidance. So we see that European countries made provision for carrying capacity. So now how with any act, any provision, they are also supporting it with policy and guidance. So how people will really execute it. So we see that European countries made provision for carrying capacity of coastal environment to align with the sustainable development goals. So for that, there was requirement to assess and undertake carrying capacity studies and align them with the goals. So anything beyond those carrying capacity would not be acceptable. Plus, they were made provision for integrated coastal zone management (ICZM), which was many of the countries undertook that in the integrated coastal zone management to align their interventions with Rio Earth Summit and also with World Coastal Conference. So, so this has led to focus, like because of this integrated and then carrying capacity has led to improved and integrated coastal management in order to deal with the complexity here. So we also see that we have UK shoreline management plans we also see countries have UK shoreline management plan. We also see estuaries management plan, coastal habitat management plan. So all these kind of management plans are coming which guide the development in the area. So how based on these plans, the regular development would be executed in those areas. So the link is provided for the reference if you would like to see that in detail. So there are also initiatives for flood and coastal defense work. So they are majorly done for conserving key coastal areas, including nature conservation interest areas of SACs, SPAs, and Ramsar sites. So this is particularly important where current defense line are very weak, so they cannot really protect. So then these kind of areas protect those coastal areas. So we see there are other kind of interventions also, like European Union also initiated the framework for maritime spatial planning and integrated coastal management. So like the spatial plans are prepared and then guidelines are also given for integrated coastal management plan. And this is said to be an instrument which has to be adopted by the other member states. And in integrated coastal management, this allows the coverage of entire, allows information collection, how the planning has to be done, how this decision making has to be done, and how management and monitoring has to be undertaken. It all provides all kind of guidelines here. So this was what we saw today. So summarizing our coverage, we saw coastal ecological and geomorphological context and the authorities and how what kind of problems are there. Then we reviewed global agreement, coastal and marine biodiversity and its implication. Then we also looked at policy framework for coastal marine biodiversity and protected areas, and as well as we looked at the policies and some of the guidelines which are available at the international level. So that was the coverage for today. Were our key references which we had used for this particular session. So these are the suggested watch and reads. Our coverage is very limited in terms of what we can cover. So a lot of acts and other things we have mentioned, but not covered in detail. So you can also look at some of the detailed reviews and other things which have been given to you. So please, winding up here, please feel free to ask questions. Let us know about any concerns you have. Do share your opinion, experiences and suggestions. Looking forward to interacting and co-learning with you while exploring EIA. Thank you.